Right guys, part one, the drawing. Simple rectangular shape, as you would normally get on paper but on cardboard. We're going to start on the left hand side, make sure you only leave a little bit of room because we've got to fit it all in. Right, we're going to start right on the edge of the snout and do a nice gentle upward curve until just before halfway. Then we're going to stop there. Go back to the nose and we're going to go underneath. Gentle, slowly lowering line away. If you make a mistake, don't worry, you can rub it out. I'm just going to go a little bit further because I don't think I've got enough there. Then we're going to draw the mouth. The great white shark never looks overly happy, so he has a grumpy looking mouth. And we'll draw a few teeth in there. Then underneath the mouth it curves down, very gradual curve downwards, until we get about there. We're not going to the same length, I've gone through the cardboard a bit there, do not worry about that. Let's go back to the front. He's got a sensor here for his nose, so we put that in. And then right just above the entrance to the mouth we have to do the eye, not a very big eye, and we draw that in with a little line behind it just to show the shape. And then we're now going to go back to the top of the shark, so we've got to do the dorsal fin, big fin, so curve upwards, and it's like a very big triangle, or curved triangle, there we go. So right to the tip. And on the back thing it goes away slightly and we've got a jagged edge. So you do some little jaggedy lines, almost like you're doing a very tiny scribble. And then that curves back into the body about there, and I've gone through the cardboard again. Don't worry about that too much. Right, and now we're going to go on the back of the shark, slowly going downwards, a very, very slow downward angle. It's almost straight, until we get to a tiny little fin, a little triangle again, and then we've got another straight bit, and then we stop there, and we've got the back of the fin there. The fin at the back is huge, so we curve upwards, and again it's like a very thin, long triangle. So we slowly go back, up, 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 then stop, and then we go back down very slowly. There's a little sticky outy triangle, before going back down to the main part of the shark on the tip. There we go. And again I've gone through the cardboard, so you just got to be careful you don't press on too hard. Right, now we're going to go back over to our line at the bottom of the shark, and we want the fin on the right hand side. This is the left hand side of the shark, but we still need to show the fin on the other side. So very, very small, and that's it, just an upside down triangle. Now we need to do the fin on this side of the shark, so we're going to go up into the middle, not quite the middle I'd say, and draw another, forgive the shadow, I'm creating, and we go down, 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 till we're about in the middle, then curve again away, then we go back up there. We've got a little square bit before we go back up to the body. And we do a curve to show it how it's connected to the body. And we can draw our line of the body underneath now the tummy. On the other side of the fin we show the rest of the tummy. Now we're going back upwards again now. So we're going to go upwards slowly past the belly. And then we've got two fins on the bottom. We've got the big ones here. Very long triangular upside down triangles again. And we draw them, square them off. And we keep the body going, and we've got another fin as we go back upwards here, which is just about the same as the other one, perhaps slightly behind. And we finish the body off, we curve into the tail. Now the bottom part of the tail is a tiny bit smaller than the top, so again it's another triangle, very long and thin. Okay, and now we have the shape of our shark. Now Now we just got to draw some lines in. We will need these lines later. We have a line on the shark that separates some of the darker colour of the top with the white at the bottom. So it starts at the tail, middle of the tail, we draw a line right down the middle of the shark almost, until we get the large bottom fin here, and we curve it off to there. And then that line then continues, we're going to go back up slightly, and that line goes almost straight to there, to the large centre fin. And then we come off that centre fin, we curve, and we've got a little bump in it. It kind of goes a bit wriggly from now on, but right in the middle roughly. We go round the eye, round the snout bump. Here we go. That's going to help us with our painting later on. And now his tip on that side has a dark bit. We can actually draw that bit in there. And there we go. That's part one almost. Now the last thing we've got to do is the gills. He's got 5 gills, or should I say sheet, as it's a gill shark. So the first gill is here. That's 1. We'll go back down for number 2. We'll go back up for number 3. And as they go, they just spread out. There's number 4. And finally number 5. There we go. There's our 5 gills. And that is the drawing part of the shark. That's all the drawing we're going to do. The next step is to put the first layer of paint. Right guys, part 2. The background colour. Now first of all, I'm just going to quickly show you what I've got. I've got the same as you guys. I have a big paintbrush and a small paintbrush. That's it. And the bit we're going to need for this bit is the big paintbrush to colour in our background colour. Now, all you'll need for this is just the plain darkish blue colour. Now I've had to slightly adjust mine because my blue paint is slightly different to the one you've got at school. So I've had to adjust mine where you guys, you've already got your paint all ready to go. So we're going to start at the top and work our way down. So load your big paintbrush up with paint. You may need water if it's a little bit thick, which I'm going to also do. And then we just start off at the top, work our way along in lines going across the page. And it's just filling in all that cardboard around the shark. This will hopefully only take a few minutes, then we're going to leave this to dry out because we don't want to smudge it. And that gives us our nice background layer for our painting. Just be careful not to go over the shark. If you go over it slightly, there's no worries because we're going to paint the shark later on. The only thing I would suggest is don't add too much water because it will make the paint very thin and the cardboard will show through. So if you need to add a little, you may not even need to add any water, but if you have to, only a tiny bit. Now some parts of the shark you will not be able to go across, so just go down very gently. Then blend it with the paintbrush, pull it away like I'm doing there, and it sort of looks like you're going across then. You don't need to really force the paintbrush, you just need to just let it glide across the paper and possibly tap it along. As you can see, I've just gone over the line a little bit there, but we're not too worried about that. We can work with that later and get it all neatened up. Very important just to get this background colour on and block the background in. Don't be afraid to move the paper. I'm, as you see, going to move it to help myself here with this tricky bit at the top. And for you guys at the moment, the picture will actually be upside down on the camera. So don't worry about it. It's just going to help me and will help you when you're doing your painting to do underneath. It might be just easier to turn it round because you're not then leaning over, and you can get a nice crisp edge. As you can see there, I've used a little too much water and it's made the paint just that tiny bit thin, so we just add a bit more paint and just thicken it up. That will happen in places, don't worry about it, because you can go back over it. Turn the page back over to finish. Okay, we have our background. Now I'm just going to quickly show you what I use at home for my painting. My background where I do all my paintings on is just 2 sketchbook covers sellotaped together to create an A3 size page which I can lean on so the paint doesn't get on anything. And then to clean my brushes, I put it in the water as like you would do at school. But what I use is a cleaned pot, washed out food pot, and then to clean them I use an old homely sock that's been in the wash. It's been cleaned, chopped it in half, and I use it to dry my paintbrushes on. And it's good recycling rather than using paper towels all the time, and it's very useful to do and very simple. So that is part 2 complete. Right guys, part 3. Now I've adjusted the camera slightly so it's easier for you guys to see this bit. Now in my palette I have mixed the blue with some of the white to make a much more pale, lighter coloured blue. So like a whitish blue. Okay. Right, at the top of the picture we are going to create the surface of the ocean, because we are underneath the ocean, so we need to have the surface, and so it gives a very nice effect in the picture. Now what we've got to do, we don't colour it all, we do just little curling, swirling strokes, and it creates a patchwork effect. So you just have little hints of this lighter colour just showing through. Try not to press on too hard, just let the brush glide over the page. Now we want to go to about halfway, so where his nose is, that is how far we're going to go down with this bit. And you'll see why in a minute, because we're going to fade, because the centre of the page is roughly where it will fade away. That's where we're going to create that effect. Just work our way across. Take your time with this, there's no need to rush. But we should have a nice light blue effect. Now you may need to keep mixing a bit more if you need it, just like I am here, because I'm a little bit short of paint. There we go. Make sure you leave enough dark blue. We don't have to blotch it all out. We're going to go back over that later with another lighter colour later. Right, for the middle bit we're going to blend this out. So in the middle we don't want the patch effect, we want a more solid effect. So we're going to go slightly underneath the shark now, because we've gone past the halfway in the page. I'll come up here just so you see that bit. Now what we do here is add tiny bits of water, because we're going to thin the paint out just that little bit here. And as you'll see, it will start to fade back into the darker blue, which is what we want. Because as you go down the page, we go deeper into the ocean, it will need to be darker. And if necessary, add a bit of that darker blue back in just to re-darken it, just that tiny bit as well, because it will help. So I'll add a tiny bit of the dark blue now. I'm just going to go across and just fade it out. Try not to press on too hard, because in your brush will still be quite a lot of that lighter colour. We don't want this bit to be too light because we're fading it out. I'm just going across, fading out. Oops. Don't worry about that. As you can see there, it's gone a little bit light, so we just grab a little bit of that darker blue, not too much, and we'll just go over that and fade that out. There we go, look, and it's already faded itself back out again. And there we go, we have a fade of the sea out. We might want to just darken a bit up there, that's just a little too light there. And that is that section done. So, what we can do now, I think we need to darken the very bottom of the page, might need to be a tad darker. So what we're going to do is get our blue again, and I need to reload with a bit more blue. You guys probably won't need to, you probably will have enough, but I've only put a small amount of paint in mine. So I'm going to add a bit more blue, just see if that works. Let's have a look. Really nice darker blue. Not washed the paintbrush yet. I'm just going to layer on a darker blue down there, so it's got a slightly darker tinge to it. And as you can see, some of the light has come through, don't worry about that. And what we may have to do to darken our blue a tiny bit more, I'm going to add a tiny drop of black. Now be warned, the black darkens the blue a lot. You will need the tiniest amount of black. We don't want this to be too dark, we want it to be dark to show through, but not too dark, because the shark is the centre of our picture, not the water. So if we pop a bit of that black on, we'll have a look. That's better, that's not too much there, that's just darkened it just enough. Don't worry if you don't get it right first time. As you can see there, look how I accidentally put a bit of white into my picture, but don't worry, we can darken that out. There we go. That's already darkened that out. Don't worry, we don't make mistakes. As Bob Ross says, we have happy accidents. And there we go, look, we've already solved that little accident we've had there, and that's now gone. And we've got a slightly darker colour to the bottom of our page. That shows the depth of the picture. And now we can wash our brush. Just make sure your brush is nice and dry. Wipe it thoroughly. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit damp, but that's how we're going to have it. Right. Now we're going to go back up to the top again, and we're going to make an even lighter blue, using the white and the blue. Using the big brush still using the big brush. And then we've got an even lighter blue. It's much whiter now. Now I've got quite a bit on my brush there, you've got to be very careful because we want it very finely put on in places. Just little bits here and there, just to show the, again we use the same curling technique with the brush. Don't press on too hard. And this shows the motion of the water on the surface. We want this more towards the top of the picture because that's our foreground. So we don't need a lot of that. And there we go. And that is the foreground of our water. Now we'll go back to that later and add some really fine detail with a small brush, but we're not going to do that yet. And there we go. Right guys, part 4. What you'll need to do is put a bit of water on your brush, and then with that really fine light blue paint we had earlier, make it nice and thin. We want a very thin paint. And what we're going to do is do some light streaks, because light goes through the top of the water from the sun and down into the depths, and that's shown quite often with the water picture, so we're going to just do a few just to show that effect. So from the surface of the water, we drag a brush straight down. Even go through the shark if you need to, don't worry, because we're going to paint over that afterwards. And just do a few, we don't need to do many. Showing that effect. Now we need to do this quite quickly because we need to fade these out, so we're just going to quickly just do a few. Pick a point of where you think it would go and then angle them downwards. As you can see, I'm changing my angle. We're going into a point which we can't see. But there we go. Right, dip your paintbrush in the water very quickly. Dampen it down if you've got too much. Then just quickly fade these out. Because what we need to do is just fade them out just very lightly. Just so they're blended. There we go. And there we go. That's our thing. I'm just going to add another one here because it... There we go. We don't need too many. Otherwise it will ruin the effect and overwhelm the picture. So we've done that now. We can wash our brush again. Right guys, next part. We are going to start painting the shark. Now for this, the first thing you're going to need is white. And what we're going to do is paint the shark's belly. And what the shark is renowned for, the great white shark, is its white belly. So what you'll need for this is the thin brush. Here's mine, loaded with white paint. Probably a little too much white paint actually to start with. You've got to very, very carefully add that white paint on. We've got to be very careful we don't go over the line around the shark. Not too fussed if we go through the middle line, in the middle of the shark, because we're going to add our darker grey colours afterwards. But around the outside of the shark we must be very, very careful. Just a little bit more white there, there we go. This is very much probably the trickiest bit of the painting. Now where you went over with the blue earlier, you may have done, you may not have done. Well, I certainly did. So I've got to just edge the picture out slightly where I remember where I'd gone over it. You might be able to see your pencil line still, which I can just about see. So I can mend that. Now we're going to add up all the white bits on now. Now we've got to come back to the white in a little while. Don't worry too much about the gills later, we're going to go over them with a bit of a darker colour later. In fact, we may do a little bit of a cheat, I think, with the gills later, but we'll come back to that. Now the thin on the other side, underneath the thins are white. Now that bit there is a lot darker, so I'm going to leave that blank for now. So go the other side of the thin there, so we don't need that. I like little aeroplane wings. There is a little bit of white above the thin here, so I'll just put that bit in there. There we go. Let's work our way back. Now this thin here has got a little bit of white paint, it's got more grey on it, so we'll just add a little bit there, and that's it, that's all we'll add. We'll carry on back. This is where we've got to be very careful now because it gets very, very thin. Now this tiny thin here, the much smaller thin, is all white, so we can paint all of that in. Very careful to get a nice point. There we go. Now we put a line in the middle, so we've got to stay under that line because that's white underneath. It's grey on top. Don't worry if you go over it slightly though, because we can paint over it, which we're going to slightly with the greyer colour. So now we've just got the edge of this thin is white. Don't worry about the inside. The outside has got to be nice and crisp. There we go, and that's the white bit of the shark done for now. We've got to come back to that in a little while, but we don't need to worry about that now. Just going to add a bit more white in there where I think it's faded a little bit. And there we go, that's the white section done. Okay, wash our brushes. Right guys, next bit, the grey part of the shark. Now what you need for this is to add a tiny bit of the black to the white to create a very light grey. It's much easier to make things darker than it is to make things lighter, so we start on a light colour and we're going to work our way darker. Use the thinner paintbrush for this again, because it is going to make life easier. So start at the top. Again, we must not go over the line to the sea, because it will ruin it. To make this easier, I might end up turning this around so it's upside down briefly, because it's going to be easier to paint, as you can see. Doesn't matter if you go over the white slightly, because that's inside, and also there is a pattern, so just try and be as careful as you can. Make sure you don't go over the eye. We'll come back to the eye later to paint that. See, I've gone over the eye a tiny bit, but I'm not too fussed by that. Take your time with this, there is no rush. Now, don't worry about it. This is actually quite a light colour, but there we go, I can turn it back now because it's just easier for me. Now bear in mind, I'm actually painting this partially sideways so the camera can actually focus mostly on the picture. Just try and get between the gills. We're going to sort them out later, we don't have to worry about them at the moment. It's very much getting a background coat of grey on the shark like we did with the white. Try and do a single stroke if you can along the edge, it does help. It's not always easy to do, but it does help. Take your time when you're on the edge. There we go. Now the thin here has got a bit of grey on it, so we can add the grey onto that thin. Now I'm going to spin the painting back round so it's upside down again, so I can do this edge. You may want to do this if it helps you, it certainly helps me. Now be careful when you're doing this because you can lean on wet paint and then mess up your picture, so just be very careful because the paint is wet and you can very easily lean on it. I'm just going over that slightly. There we go. I can spin it back over so we can do the thin. And we'll do the bottom first. Now we're keeping that white edge. Now I'm going to spin it this way to do this edge. Creates a nice crisp edge as we go along. Here we go. Spin it back round again for this thin. That'll be the final one. Now I'm a little bit short on my paint now, so I have to quickly mix up a little bit more just to finish it off. We'll just do the very top of the thin, and then we'll have the first layer of grey on. There we go. And that is that. That is the grey. Right guys, next step. Shadows. Every object creates a shadow, so underneath the shark is where the darkness is. So you're going to mix up the white, a tiny bit of black and the blue to make a grey blue. More towards the grey, as you can see there, using this very small paintbrush. We're going to paint, first of all, underneath his snout. Be very careful with the edge. It's probably coming out a tiny bit darker than we'd like, so if it is a tad on the dark side, add a bit more white to it, just to lighten it up a little bit. Let's try that. Ah, that's better. Work our way around the mouth. Add a tiny bit of water just to make it a little thinner. We can get away with adding more water now because we already have a layer of paint over the top of the cardboard, so it's not absorbed as much now. Very, very carefully go around the edge. As we get further underneath, we're going to get a little bit more paint on there because the shark gets wider at this point. Obviously the fin is underneath, so we'll put the fin into shadow. take your time with this because we don't want to make any errors. We've got to get the shadow in exactly the right place. There we go. Right, once you've done the front part, we go past the thin and then we keep going. You might need to keep adding a little bit of water every time just to keep the thinness. Don't add too much at once though, because it will be too thin and the white will show through too much. Nice smooth edge. Get to this thin again, and then we have another little bump there, and then we're going to draw a line where there's a little shadow. Move my pen. Right, again being very careful against the edge. This bit at the back, it's quite thin and actually gets quite dark. We will have to go over that with a slightly dark shadow in a moment. And there we go, that's our first shadow coat on. Now what we're going to do with our grey colour is add a tiny bit more black to it. So we want to make it a little bit darker now. And we might add a tiny bit of the blue. We don't want it to be too blue because it will fade into the background too much. We've got to make it quite grey coloured, but with a hint of blue in it. So let's try that. There we go. Okay, so as you can see it's a little darker. Don't need to wash the brush, we might add a tiny bit of water if we need to. Just be very careful not to lean on the paint you've already used with your hand. I think I need to make that a little darker still. Now if you notice, when I've got too much paint on my brush, I spin it into a point and then pull it. So you've got a little point, as you can see there. Just go back over just the edge. We don't need to do any more than the edge because that's where it's going to be at its darkest. And we might even shade that very dark bit in. We're going to go over that tiny bit there, look, as you can see. Right, so the darkness at the end. Tiny bit of water in there just to finish. Now it's very dark in this back corner here. Very dark. So we're just going to have a little extra in there, just to finish it. Now the next bit is where it joins together. I think it needs to be a tad lighter, so we're going to water down our mixture we've got and add a bit more white into it. Wipe my brush off because it's a bit mucky. Let's just see what this looks like. It's still a bit dark. There we go. Right, then we add our lighter colour just on the top this time. So we just want to lighten it off a bit. There we go. That's going to just help blend it in a bit more. So we just go over the top. That blue we had. That'll just help to blend it in a bit more. At the moment it's not as blended as it could be. I mean, it looks like it sticks out just that bit too much. There we go. Right. A bit complete. Right guys, the darker tones of the top part of the shark need to get done now, so we need to mix a darker grey than we had before. This is like a medium grey because we'll need a darker colour than this after we've added this on. So we're going to start just adding, we don't colour the whole shark with darker colour, just patches. Just slowly work our way along. There's just different areas that are just a little bit darker. It's very patchy. You might need to add a bit of water to keep your paint relatively thin. But it doesn't matter if the brush is a tad on the dry side because it does create nice patchwork. Get a little bit down there. So just work your way along the shark. Adding this little bit of patchwork in. Now we've got some on the thin as well. There we go. Be careful with the thin though, that's a little bit on the dark side. I'll just go back and do the big thin, the dorsal things, it's quite dark there. Right guys, next step is the darker grey. Now this time I've added more black to my mixture. Not too much because a lot of black will instantly overwhelm it, so just add a little bit more black and mix it until you've got that lovely darker colour. Now again, we're going to go back over the shark again, but there's a lot less of it this time. It's just little bits here and there. And this is just adding our layers to our shark. You may have to be careful because if it is still wet, you may lean on in them bits and it will ruin the picture, so just be very careful. One area that is very dark is the dorsal fin, but it's not the whole thing. And remember that bit under that thin there that was really dark? We need to just colour that in there. So this colour is perfect for it. And we just need to add a few bits here and there just to darken it up a little bit. Remember that bit at the back that was quite dark? Well, we can use that colour to make that connection between the main body and the tail. That bit's exceedingly dark. Now we just got to work our way up and just add the bits into the tail that are quite dark. So there's a few patches that particularly show through. There's a tiny dark bit on this thing here, which I did miss. So we'll put that one in. There we go. Right, there we go. And now we can actually just darken the mouth area a little bit. I'll try and do it without creating too much shadow. Here we go. Right guys, to add a little bit of specialness to this painting, just an added extra element, we're going to take some of the, add some white back into our grey to just make it a little bit lighter again. And we're going to add a bit of water to this. We want this to be quite thin, as you can see there, okay? And we're going to create a reflection. Now underwater, reflections actually are underneath the surface. So what we're going to do, we're going to go from the top of the fin, and we're going to create just a little lines like that. I just hope it's picked up on the video. Not solid, we do like little drifting lines. Now they're going to get wider and wider because at the moment it's mirror imaging the shark. So we just work our way along and just gradually, they're not going to be straight because the surface of the water is always going up and down and moving side to side. So it's very much going to be just to show that little reflection there. There we go. We can't see all the shark because we'll need a much taller piece of cardboard to show that, so we're only going to show a little bit of it that we can see. There we go. Okay. Now what we can do actually is even add a little bit of a very whitey grey colour there. I'm just going to show you on that. It's mainly white, little bit of the grey colour mixed in just to add, and that's going to give us another layer in a minute. So we don't follow them exactly, we kind of just go up and down. Try not to press on too hard, nice and light, because we want it very thin. And that just gives us two layers to our reflection. Just there, very, very gentle little movements. There we go. Now because the top of the shark where the fin is quite dark, we're going to just take some of that darker grey now. Just add a third layer into that. There we go. That's all we need, and we'll add a tiny bit into the thing. We don't need a lot in this one, so as it'll start looking messy. There we go, that's all we need, the tiniest little bit. Okay. Now, what we need now then is to get a tiny bit of white. I've just had to add a little bit more because I've actually run out of white, so I've just added a little bit more and get a tiny bit of white. Make sure you've got a nice clean paint brush for this. Tiny bit of white. Spin the white so you've got a really pointy edge to your brush. And the very tip of the thin, the dorsal thin at the back of it here, and you're going to do just a little wriggly line. There we go. That's it. That's all that's needed. And then you can actually just make it so it doesn't, there we go. Just a few gaps to show it's trailing off. And then on the other thin here, we're going to do a little bit more. So we're going to trade it off. We're actually just going to go under the thin here, and I'll tell you why in a moment. The tip of the thin is going to be above the water, I think. So what we do, we'll do a little bit above that. We go across the top of the thin and cut that off. Now we're going to fade that out in a minute with a little bit of blue from earlier. Find a bit of my blue that I've got. I'm just going to go across the top of the thin and just fade that out a little bit. You can still see it a little bit, but that's what we want because water is see-through. Right, with your white paint now, do the same again. Nice thin tip to your brush. You want it nice and clean though, so we want nice clean white coating for this. This is a little bit tricky, this bit. The water creates a kind of a shadow on the shark from all of its drifting, and these are in the form of white lines. Now the white lines crisscross zigzag all over the shark. So what we've got to do now is we've got to be very brave, and we're going to do some of these lines across the shark. Now you will have to keep refilling your brush with this and keep spinning out to a nice deep point each time. And this creates a very lovely effect on the shark. Remember to keep dipping your brush. As you can see, I'm going back and refilling and retipping the brush each time I've done a line. You've got to press on really light with this. Do not press on too hard or you get these really big thick horrible lines, and we don't want them. We want nice fine lines. Some connect, some don't. But these create a very lovely effect on the shark, as you can see. Makes it look very stripy. And while we've got the white paint, get a really thin tip to your brush, and you can very carefully add a few of the teeth, because some of the teeth just show through. But the teeth are literally the tiniest little dots, that's all they are. And we're very close to being finished now. Right guys, the last few bits we have to do. For a start, we need to get a tiniest bit of black, roll our paintbrush so we get a nice fine tip, and very carefully we need to paint the eye. Now the eye is pure black, so we have to very carefully, and the eye is very round as well, so we have to very carefully just slowly form a shape. Go back if you need to, add a bit more paint if you need to, thin out your brush so it's a really fine tip. Here we go. That's all we need because it's such a fine tip. And really the final thing we need to do now, just be very careful when your paint is still wet, is grab your pencil and you're going to actually create a slight outline of it. But we're not going to do the top part of the body because that's on the lighter side. What we're going to do is take our pencil very carefully, and don't press on too hard, just form an outline round the mouth very carefully. And there we have it, a finished great white shark.